Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you for another Film Fanatic show. It's about 9:30 on a Friday morning. Pretty overcast. It's supposed to be pretty rainy the next few days, but hey, it's a good climate to watch movies. It's always fun. I always love watching movies during a big snowstorm. That's always a fun space to be in, and when it's raining, but snowing when it's snowing out, I'm always a big fan of that. I typically, always whenever I watch a movie, it's typically always at night. I'm not really a daytime movie guy. I'll go to a movie like if it's a matinee or something, but I used to go to matinees all the time back when the Colonial Theater was a thing, which was a great movie theater in Belfast, but it's been closed for a few years, and I just heard recently that it's going to be reopening, so that's pretty exciting. I think it's going to be, I think it's supposed to open again in November, like early November. I do think it's going to be a different setup, though. I think it's there's a few different people involved with running it. I don't know the specifics, but I think it's got there's a couple of different people involved with the film, and I think with the film theater, and I think they're gonna change it a little bit. I think it's gonna be not what it used to be as far as it being a regular movie theater where they would just show new releases, and then back in the day when the Colonial was a regular theater, they were kind of like other theaters in that regard. They would show like new releases of the time and have them run for a couple of weeks, and then they would always show usually they'd have a pretty big selection. They would show like a big three or four big blockbuster movies that were coming out, and then they would show during the week or on a weekend for a little bit of a less of a run. They would show maybe an independent film or a foreign film, especially if it was a film that was getting a lot of attention or buzz. And then occasionally they would do like, like bring back a film classic and show it then for like a real limited release. And then things change really drastically because of, what the world has been going through the last few years. And it became, a music venue at one point. They were doing comedy nights. And at one point, they stopped completely showing any new releases. And they were just showing older films. And it was a very different place. Very different place. I did go a couple of times. I did go see The Godfather. They had a free showing of The Godfather, which is my favorite movie of all time. That was the last time I went to the theater, and that was, oh, geez, it was the summer before last, so over a year ago. I remember being really excited to see it because The Godfather is my favorite film of all time, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, and I have that movie on DVD, and I don't know why, but I don't own it on Blu-ray, but that it's my all-time favorite movie. So I was very excited about seeing it in the theater, and it was an okay experience. It wasn't great. It was cool in some regards to just see my favorite film on the big screen, but there were a lot of things around it that weren't particularly great. The main thing being it wasn't really the transfer of, however, the setup was the I know that most theaters don't show film anymore. They have to adapt to this new kind of digital technology. But the transfer, this particular copy of the film that they had shown was not very good quality. The pixelation was really weird, and at times it was really good. But there were certain times in the film where there would be I noticed it around these big shots, these big scenes of where there might have been, say, a lot of white or a brighter color scheme. the pixelation was totally off, and it would be all like messy and almost distorted. It was really weird. When there were scenes of where it was a little bit darker, and maybe in a scene where there was like it was in a room, it was really good. But pixelation was okay, and it was a weird time because, that being said, it was still great to see it, but I I was really surprised too, and it was kind of off-putting. There were, maybe 30 people in the theater, and before the movie was shown, Mike Hurley, who is the owner of the Colonial Theater, came out and talked about the film, which I thought was really cool. And he did a little talk about it, the history of the film, and kind of where the theater is at, now at that, well, at least at that time. And then he asked the people in the audience, how many people have seen this film, and most of the people in the theater had never seen The Godfather, and I was just like, what? And it was kind of staggering that they had never seen this film, and so it was cool in some ways seeing a film because it's a long movie. It's like 2.5 hours. It's close to 3 hours, and when I watched it, nobody walked out. Everybody stayed, and people seemed to actually really enjoy it. And so, but I always find it kind of shocking that when I meet people who have never seen The Godfather. I mean, obviously, there's so many things to, and for me too, that's happened. Like there's certain films, certain bands, certain albums that are classic kind of essential albums that if you're a fan of music or a fan of film, that you should kind of know about, or at least you know check out. To a degree, they almost act as like blueprints, or kind of seismic things in those particular genres. So they kind of they need to be seen like they're essential. But I had an experience a few years before that where I had we had this with a group of friends at the time that I had. We had a movie night, and we watched The Godfather, and most of the people there at this particular party had not seen The Godfather, and they cashed out. They were all there was an age difference, obviously, and I think that that's part of the reason, but you know I I think it was probably more of a generational thing, but most people thought it was boring. They thought it was too slow. Some people fell asleep, and I was just like, wow, I couldn't believe it. Um, but I think it's like and then you have two fractions of people who like movies. You have people who, where they have seen movies, or they've gone to the movies here and there, and they're like casual fans. And they know of certain films, certain classic films, or if you mentioned, or movies, say in a more contemporary vein, like they know what they've heard of Lord of the Rings, or they've seen it, or the Harry Potter films, or like the Indiana Jones films, or just general things that are kind of part of our culture, and so they know what those are, and those kinds of things. You have like and then the casual movie fan of where they see a movie once in a blue moon, or they barely ever go to the movies. Maybe they did it one time. Uh, they generally don't watch movies at home. They might with like their family, but they like movies. And then you have people who are like really into film, and people who are who follow films, and know about movies, and collect movies. And I'm always shocked by when people kind of in that mindset have not seen when I've met people over time who have never seen The Godfather, and they're more in that category, because I think it's like essential. I kind of like think of it as like um, if you're say into rock and roll music and you're a fan of like classic rock or American rock or British rock and roll or American rock and roll, and that person is not aware of or has never heard of bands like Led Zeppelin or Black Sabbath, kind of essential. And I kind of feel like that's kind of shocking and kind of ridiculous at the same time that I feel like The Godfather is like that, is the equivalent to that in for film and for people who are fans of film, and they're really that whole thing is really a part of their fabric. But anyway, so this is another like specialty video for Film Fanatic, and this show is going to be about one of the greatest directors of all time, and that is Martin Scorsese. He just turned 80 years old, and this weekend it actually opened last night. His new movie, Killers of the Flower Moon, premiered last night. It is now in theaters across the country. I am very, very excited about seeing it. I'm going to see it on Sunday. I got tickets with a friend to go see it Sunday night. To go actually to a daytime show, which I think technically is a matinee. So very, very excited about seeing that. I've been wanting to see this movie for a very, very long time. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro, and it's a movie that I first heard about 2 years ago. And so the anticipation has really grown. I love Scorsese. He's 80 years old, just turned 80, and he's still I think at the top of his game. He's still got the same power and the same grit to all of his films. And from the start of his career to where he is now. The Killers of the Flower Moon, I remember talking to a couple of people that have read the book, because it's based on a book for the most part, and I've heard that the book is just amazing and epic, and a very shocking story. Basically, it's about to a degree of a form of America's hand in genocide. So, and Scorsese's films typically, when it comes to say the dark aspects of humanity, or his portrayal of violence in film, he's notorious for going to pretty dark places. I mean, a lot of his films are very, very dark, and they go to places that the outer reaches that some people are afraid to talk about, or some directors or filmmakers are kind of afraid to go to. But he's known for having this really gritty kind of aesthetic to his film, being able to tell these epic kind of sweeping stories. But there's always the violence in his films are usually pretty brutal. And I've heard that this film is well, it's supposed to be, it's very long. It's 3.5 hours, but which, that's pretty long, but it is what it is. But I've heard that this film is really great. Has lots of elements. I've heard it's kind of a shocking story. So I loved his last film that he did about 2 years ago, The Irishman. I think that movie is just incredible. I've only seen it once. I think it was a real true to form film or true to a reemergence of how great Robert De Niro and Al Pacino once were, and Joe Pesci. They kind of hit this weird pattern, I feel, especially De Niro and Al Pacino. They hit this weird pattern later in their career where they kind of became, I don't know, parodies of themselves, and they weren't really, it felt like a lot of the films, especially De Niro, they were taking on these projects and these films simply for like a paycheck, and they were just kind of showing up. It felt like in a lot of these films and just kind of doing their shtick that they're known for, and there were kind of bad interpretations of for De Niro, for instance, bad interpretations of like gangster roles that he's played, and the same thing with Pacino. And it was always, disconcerting and just like, a turnoff when whenever you look back to the early parts of both of their careers. They were the best around, the best in their generation. Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, Goodfellas. I mean, the list is endless. Cape Fear and Scent of a Woman, Scarface, Serpico. I mean, amazing, amazing films, amazing, acting at the highest level. So it was strange to see them for about 10 or 15 years just kind of show up and have the cameras turned on and just them being these weird parodies of themselves. But it wasn't until I saw The Irishman where I thought Pacino and De Niro were just amazing. And it harkened back to that classic period of, one time when these guys were legendary actors, the best of the best. And their roles in that film, they're just incredible. So, and I thought when De Niro was in the Joker film, I thought he was amazing in that movie. So very, very cool to see them, much older, but still have that, that 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 fire to their ability, and to really bring it and step up and bring that intensity to the screen, kind of like when they were younger. Very, very cool. And so that was the last Scorsese film I saw. But I've talked a lot about how certain directors out there, especially a director who has been around for when you think about it, for decades. Case in point, Scorsese. I think there's a lot of directors out there that have like really consistent careers, and again, it's subjective to up to your own personal standards or your own views. But I think it's a pretty safe consensus that you can look at someone's body of work and you can kind of tell, like, when there were you know just beautiful things that they put out, but then there's all these like misfires. I think it's pretty obvious to most people, when that does happen, and when you can kind of get a sense of a director or an actor where they just have this incredibly consistent body of work, as opposed to someone who is kind of all over the place and isn't really consistent. And and that when that happens, when I think, for instance, a director who, at least for my money, isn't very consistent and is kind of all over the place, is Ridley Scott. I really love Ridley Scott. I think, especially in the early part of his career, he was, a legend, and he was a real maverick. And then along the way, I'm not sure what happened. He just, I don't know if it was due to studio problems, working with certain companies, just maybe kind of cashing in, just losing the enthusiasm that he once had. There's probably lots of variables, and it can be just that, you have some directors that are, they put everything, every bit of their soul into a couple of projects, and then after that, maybe the magic's just not there anymore. They don't really have anything to say. And then you have other artists that keep continually bring that same passion. And I think Ridley Scott's an example of where a lot of things went awry. I felt like when I noticed things seemed to really shift with his career was when he did the Silence of the Lambs sequel, Hannibal. That's when I felt like I didn't know what was going on, and it was like, I started, it felt like it wasn't the same, it wasn't Ridley Scott anymore. It felt like there was, there were all these other things happening, and it was like this misguided vision and a misguided and a film that was directed that just didn't have that clear vision that he had when he did films like Blade Runner or even Gladiator or especially Alien. So, and along the way there were lots of films I felt were kind of all over the place and kind of messy, and I thought one more recent relatively recent film that he did that I thought was really good was The Martian with Matt Damon. I think that's actually a really good movie. But but when I think of his career, and he's been around for decades, Martin Scorsese's been around longer, but not by much. With Scorsese, there isn't a film that I can name or think about that is not good. I just feel like he has tackled many different genres. He's mostly known for making these really gritty crime-based movies about the mafia, but he's done all kinds of different genres, and I feel like there isn't one film that he's done that was a misfire or a misstep. I think everything he's ever done and has ever been involved in still has that fire, and he brings the juice every time. And he's 80, just turned 80 years old, and I think that it's pretty miraculous and very inspiring. My favorite director of all time, Stanley Kubrick, perfect example. You can't find one movie in his whole like amazing uh, career that was a dud or that was a misfire. It's impossible. Everything was he ever did just was gold, and I feel like Scorsese is that same kind of filmmaker. Spielberg, I feel like, is a director, and also say Brian De Palma, legendary filmmakers, and at one time or maybe in one period of a particular decade or an entire decade, they were just masters at their craft. But over time, I don't know what happened, and there's a lot of inconsistency in their career. There's a lot of things I feel that you could, that could be considered to be misfires. Tarantino, I think, is a director who has just an amazing track record. Really, everything he's done has been just incredible. Just a certain kind of consistency, a real clear vision, and a sense of I don't know, a degree of integrity to everything that he's done, and it's authentic. So I think that's why Scorsese and Kubrick, why Tarantino, and there's lots of other directors, but what the difference is between somebody's career who's got this clear kind of focused um, laser precision, and then other directors where it's kind of all over the place, and it's a pretty mixed bag. I think that's the difference. And getting back to Scorsese, and talking about just the vastness of his career, which spans decades, is just astounding. From the 70s to 80s to 90s to where we are now, it's just incredible. So of course, Killers of the Flower Moon, which came out yesterday, and I'm gonna be seeing it on Sunday, and so very very excited about seeing it, and I'm definitely gonna do a review of that film either that night or the following day, which will be Monday. So, and I'll definitely do a big promotion for that, and so very excited about seeing it and talking about it. The anticipation I've had for this film and to be able to see it on the big screen is pretty high, really, really high. I did not see The Irishman on the big screen. That was a weird situation because weird might be not the most appropriate word, but The Irishman was a film that was, written and directed by Scorsese, and again, it's an incredible movie. I've only seen it once, but that movie was he Scorsese, being the legend that he is, which is very depressing, but he could not get that film financed by any major studio. And I think it was because of it's such an ambitious movie, but it's for him to tackle an epic, kind of tale is nothing new for him. I mean, pretty much everything he's done has that scope. But some films are a little bit more epic in certain, in proportions, or have a little bit more of an epicness to them, or are where they'll, certain films of his will follow the lives of certain characters in his films over the span of many years, like Casino or Goodfellas, where it follows these particular characters for a couple decades, and so it has this very sprawling kind of thing about it, and very ambitious. And The Irishman is incredibly ambitious. It's a huge movie, and it follows these characters for decades. But it's not really anything different for him, as a director. He's done that, like I said, but he could not get that The Irishman financed, so he ended up striking a deal with Netflix. And as far as I know, it was one of the first kind of turning points in, really in film history, as far as where you have, it was one of the first times, at least that I was aware of, that, an already established, a legendary director was now, going to one of these streaming companies, and they were going to finance their work, their original work. Up until that point, from what I gather, a lot of these companies, now, and again, this was 2 or 3 years ago, but a lot of the companies at the time, and then also, especially now, you have Hulu, you have Disney Plus, you have, Peacock, I mean, an endless amount of companies. And Netflix was the company that kind of started this whole weird, strange revolution. And they were at first showing movies that were older films, and then it evolved to where they started to make a lot of money, and they started doing original content, and they started making all of these television shows. And then around that time, the and they started offering more titles to a degree, and then other companies started, and then you literally had this massive explosion of all of these original based television shows and also films that were being made at these companies. But The Irishman was different because it was like you have an iconic director who was going to be completely financed by a particular company to do his work, and it was completely outside of any kind of traditional way of having a film financed, in a way, especially somebody who is such a household name like Scorsese. And since then, there's been lots of those kinds of things happening. Most notably that I can think of is David Fincher. Just an amazing director. Who has done films like Seven, and just an endless list of just amazing movies. One of my favorite directors. And now the thing that's weird is, like, he's coming out. There's a new film of his that's coming out called The Killer, and with Michael Fassbender, which looks really, really good. But his last two projects that he's done were all exclusively, and I believe it was Netflix. I think it's Netflix. Were completely financed by Netflix, and none of his films this newer film, I don't believe is going to be put in theaters, and the last film that he did was never, I don't think ever was in the theater. It was only available streaming. And the same thing happened with The Irishman, where I know it had a very, very brief time. It was like in a few select theaters. But for the most part, you could only see it digitally through streaming. And I had to wait about a year before it was released on, to a physical copy. I rented the DVD for it. That's how I saw it. So, and I really think that that's on one hand, it's great that these amazing directors can get their works you know green lighted and they can just do what they want to do. But it's also a shame and kind of saddening that these directors who are at such high level or apparently can't get backing from regular studios. And the worst thing of it is that you can't really see a lot of these films in the theater. You can't have that experience. Because I've talked a lot about the whole streaming thing, and I'm not going to go back into that, but and what my feelings are about it. So I did not get the chance to see The Irishman in the theater because of that, and I think it's sad that you can't see some films now at all. You only can see it through a streaming platform because I feel like it's just you're not getting the full impact of that experience. So and then so I'm really excited that Killers of the Flower Moon is completely. It's probably available somewhere. I think it does have some streaming. I think it is being shown on Netflix during the same time that it's in theaters. But the cool thing and the most exciting thing about it is that this movie is in a wide release. It's a national release. It's in every theater chain that there is. It's in every theater. It's everywhere. So there's all these chances now to see it on the big screen. So that's the thing I'm most excited about. But very strange times. And so his other films, of course, Goodfellas, 1990. What amazing, amazing classic. And of course, Taxi Driver in '76, Robert De Niro, amazing. Uh, Arguably my favorite Scorsese film. The Wolf of Wall Street in 2013, just such a damn good movie, so good. The Irishman, which I just talked about, it's hard to believe that came out almost 3 years ago already, 2019. And then also Shutter Island, which is a movie that it's funny, I didn't really um, wasn't really a big fan of Shutter Island when I first saw it. There were things about it that I thought were, I don't know. My first impression was I felt like some of the story was like the narrative was a little bit kind of ham-handed and was a little bit sloppy. But then I saw it again after a couple of years and I was like, this is a really good movie. It's a very different kind of a film for Scorsese. And it also stars DiCaprio, who DiCaprio has worked on so many films with him, and they have just an amazing partnership. And I've grown to really, actually, really love Shutter Island. I have it on Blu-ray, and it's kind of like a horror film. It's a very different kind of a thing. And of course, The Departed also did with DiCaprio, 2006, amazing film. Yeah, just such a great, great crime drama. Of course, Raging Bull, which I just recently watched with De Niro, probably the greatest sports or greatest boxing movie ever made. Another movie that I just actually recently saw, I think it was, yeah, it might have been last year. Yeah, it was last year. I had never seen it before, and it's an amazing film, and that is called The Silence. It came out in 2016, and it was a film that was totally under the radar. Most of Scorsese's films get a lot of acclaim and get a lot of attention, but this was one film that I'd always seen, and when I would go to Opera House Video, I would see it on shelves, and for whatever reason, I just always passed on it. And it wasn't a film that was really particularly praised, or it got good reviews, but it wasn't really given any attention. And I saw it about a year ago, and it's an amazing film. Like, I was blown away. It's a really, really good film. That came out in 2016. And of course, Casino, amazing film, just epic, amazing. Starring De Niro and Sharon Stone. I have a pretty good amount of Scorsese's films on Blu-ray at this point. there's still a lot more I need to get, but I have the essential ones I feel that I really love. I own, but there's still, like I said, there's a lot of films to his credit, a lot of amazing films, and there's still quite a few that I do want to get and I need to get. And Gangs of New York, which came out in 2002, which is a kind of a stunning movie. That movie is such a great film, and I also feel that movie was a little bit pegged by critics and people, but it's actually a really great movie. Another film with DiCaprio. Um, Probably my favorite Scorsese film of all time is Mean Streets, and that came out in '73. Harvey Keitel, Robert De Niro. The movie is such a gritty, brutal movie in so many regards. I kind of feel like that movie is almost like an exploitation movie. It's just so dirty and raw and brutal, and the ending is just like, oh my god, everybody dies, and it's just, yeah, it's an intense movie, but it's probably my favorite Scorsese movie. I have that on Blu-ray, and it's just amazing. Maestro in 2023, which I think is a documentary he did. He's done music documentaries too. Hugo, which I've never seen, which was an animated movie. I've heard it's really, really good. Came out in 2011. And then the Aviator in 2004, also with DiCaprio, which is an amazing film. Really fantastic movie. I do own that, I think, on DVD. Recently, I just saw The King of Comedy for the very first time, starring De Niro in 1982. And this movie is staggeringly good. Like, I was completely blown away by The King of Comedy. It's amazing. It's one of the greatest roles ever by De Niro. I mean, his performance in this movie is just unbelievable. Jerry Lewis is also in it. It is just an incredible movie, one of the best. And it was so weird because I was aware and I've known about The King of Comedy forever. And for just various reasons, I never got around to seeing it. And then I finally watched it, and I was captivated, blown away by it. He also did the incredible remake of Cape Fear in '91, and as great as the original film Cape Fear is, which is a classic, this remake is like just completely fucking intense. It's De Niro's character in it is just unbelievable. I mean, it's such a great film, such an intense movie, and definitely, it's a horror film. And so, again, he will tackle Scorsese will tackle biopics, these quiet little meditative films, gangster movies, horror films, or movies that have horror elements in them. Another film of his that I think is one of my favorites, and I think is just a masterpiece, and probably his most controversial film of his career, is The Last Temptation of Christ, in 1988. Just amazing, just an amazing, probably his most controversial film of all time. Um, and I have that on Blu-ray, starring Willem Dafoe, and it's a harrowing journey, just incredible. After Hours in 1985, which is a film of his I've never seen, which I need to see. And I think it's like a comedy, more of a comedy. And then the notorious and one of the greatest music documentaries ever, The Last Waltz in '78. And I saw The Last Waltz for the first time about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and it's a movie about the band and their last concert, and the performances in it are just incredible. And Scorsese's always been very well known for his use of music in films, in his films, and how music is such a passion for him. So this is an example of that. The Age of Innocence, starring Daniel Day-Lewis in '93. Another, again, just an amazing film, a masterpiece. Kundun, from 1997. Again, another film that is just a beautiful meditative work. Bringing Out the Dead with Nicolas Cage, which I really want to see again. I haven't seen it in years. Really great movie. Really dark. Super intense. That came out in 1999. I do need to see that movie. Another movie of his that I think is another masterpiece, The Color of Money, Paul Newman, Tom Cruise. I mean, just all these movies are just incredible. Um, and one of the, I think, probably my favorite, even though The Last Waltz is such a, an amazing classic. My favorite, probably my favorite kind of documentary that he's done on music is the where he did a documentary about George Harrison, who is my favorite Beatle, and that came out in 2011, and that is just a masterpiece. I highly recommend it. If you even if you're not a fan of the Beatles, you'll fall in love with this movie. Um, and I've talked a lot about the one of the most iconic directors and producers in the world of horror, or in the world of exploitation, and as well as horror exploitation, and that is the legendary Roger Corman. I love his work to death. An amazing producer and also an amazing director. He was one of the most important figures, or is one of the most important figures in, I feel, in cinematic history. So many incredible directors kind of came through his camp, and a lot of these directors came out of the world of these like low budget exploitation movies. You have so many directors. I mean, you have Francis Ford Coppola, you have George Lucas. Um, the list is endless. Um, James Cameron, John Carpenter, and also Martin Scorsese. All of these, American directors, these iconic directors, all came out of the world. Roger Corman. Roger Corman. I mean, basically greenlit all of these guys, all of these great actors or great directors I just mentioned. He started their careers, and that includes Martin Scorsese. And there is a short movie that he did, which came out in 1967, and it's called The Big Shave, and it was directed by Martin Scorsese. It was the first, as far as I know, the first movie he ever directed. It's a short film, and it was done through with the help of Roger Corman, and it is completely fucking intense. It's basically a guy, and it's kind of like this art house weird kind of exploitation thing, and it's a short film. It's only like 10 or 15 minutes, and it's basically a guy in the shower who's shaving, or a guy in his bathroom shaving, and he proceeds to start cutting his own throat, but it's all shot like in camera, and it's like brutal, and it's like really disturbing. It's all black and white, and it's intense, and you see that grittiness, like that that's in The Shave. You see that how a lot of his films, the way he focuses on violence, uh, in such a way that is just really primal, and it really gets under your skin. Just incredible, and you know, so many great examples of that. Especially like a film like Taxi Driver. You really see, when you watch The Shave, and it's available online, and it's available, I think, in other places now. But it's incredible. I highly recommend it. It's 67. It's unbelievable, and it's super short, but it's intense, and you see that grittiness, like kind of seep into his full length features like Taxi Driver, and even the real violent aspects of like Casino or Goodfellas. So many great films. So I'm very, very excited about seeing Killers of the Flower Moon. So stay tuned for a big review in over the next few days after I see it or so. And thanks again. Welcome aboard. I'd like to welcome aboard some of the new subscribers, and a lot of people have been commenting on the videos. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.